name is Jeff Liebmann. I'm consulting minister here at the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Smithton, Pennsylvania. And today's sermon is titled Behind the Clouds. It's a special sermon because this is the service that we used for our flower communion service this year, which, for me at least, is the most important day in our liturgical calendar. Our opening words come from a poem titled The Rainy Day by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. The day is cold and dark and dreary. It rains and the wind is never weary. The vine still clings to the moldering wall, but at every gust the dead leaves fall. Be still, sad heart, and cease repining. Behind the clouds is the sun still shining. Thy fate is the common fate of all. Into each life some rain must fall. Some days must be dark and dreary. We'll try that again. Following World War I and the establishment of an independent Czechoslovakia, Norbert Capek founded a Unitarian congregation in Prague called the Liberal Religious Fellowship. He introduced the Flower Festival service on June 4th, 1923 as a symbolic ritual to unite the people in the new congregation. The traditional Christian communion service was unacceptable to many who had joined the new fellowship after leaving the Catholic Church. Capek decided to utilize the native beauty of the land to create a ritual unique to this new religious body. People were asked to bring a flower of their choice to church and to place them in large vases at the entrance. During the worship service, Capek consecrated the collected flowers, and afterwards people returned to the vases and took a different flower home with them. It was such a success that it was held yearly just before the summer recess of the church. His fellowship grew into the largest Unitarian congregation in the world, with a membership of 3,400 by 1932. With the outbreak of World War II, Capek decided to remain in Europe, despite invitations to come to America. He delivered a series of sermons on the topic of freedom and justice that got the attention of the Nazi authorities. In March 1941, the Gestapo broke into Capek's apartment, confiscated his books and sermons, and arrested him and his 28-year-old daughter, Zora. Capek was charged with listening to BBC broadcasts, a capital offense, and with treason. The Nazis cited several of his sermons as evidence. A year later, he and his daughter were found guilty. The court found Capek innocent of the treason charge and recommended that, given his age, the year served in prison be counted toward his jail time. The Gestapo, however, ignored the court's recommendation, sending Capek to Dachau and Zora to forced labor in Germany. Capek's name appears among a list of prisoners sent on an invalid transport on October 12, 1942, to Hartheim Castle near Linz, Austria, where he died from poison gas. Our reflection reading today comes from a sermon of Norbert Capek's, written in 1927, titled Salvation. This relying on help from outside instead of upon ourselves flows from the doctrine of salvation which various churches still impose on us. The Catholic Church and many variety of evangelical churches teach us to look for salvation from some supernatural source, and think it blasphemous when someone feels he must seek salvation through his own moral effort. Jesus did not have the superstitious belief that an angry God required a sacrifice to reconcile himself with mankind because of Adam's sin. We owe that belief to the Apostle Paul, whereas Jesus' teaching about salvation is expressed in the parable of the prodigal son. Christian people were much harmed by the notion of the necessity of pacifying God's anger through the blood sacrifice of Jesus. Jesus' gospel was meant for the poor, the oppressed, the unjustly handicapped, and all other unfortunate people. The German reformers, Luther and Calvin, tore the heart out of Jesus' gospel and instead inserted the dogma about Jesus' sacrifice for the atonement of sins. Their religion was suitable for a feudal social system. But how much did it do for the oppressed, poor, and the enslaved people? Salvation cannot come from something or someone outside ourselves. Salvation comes only through what a person achieves on his own effort and ability. Once upon a time, in a not-so-magical kingdom, there was an ogre who owned a factory. Now, as befitted his natural demeanor, the ogre was very cruel to the factory workers. He beat them regularly, and if a worker ever gave him cause for displeasure, the ogre would cast him out of the factory forever. In fact, it sometimes seemed that the ogre enjoyed mistreating his workers more than actually running the factory effectively. There was a man who worked for the ogre. The man worked behind a tiny desk, helping the ogre keep track of production in the factory and utilizing resources more efficiently. The ogre was terrible at counting, and so needed the man's skills. But that did not stop the ogre from tormenting him mercilessly. And the man could not complain because he needed the work to support his family. Over time, the man learned ways to please the ogre and to keep the ogre from getting too mad at him. The workers in the factory toiled for years under the cloud of the ogre's wrath. The workers were talented and committed to their craft, but the ogre took any joy that they might have felt out of the work. It seemed that the factory always lay in darkness. Not the black of night, but the murkiness of a sunless day.